Hello MTG friends, Zach back with another deck tech for you today. We are going to be going over one of my favorite monocolor decks in the entire format, and a deck that I have been kind of proselytizing for a very long time, especially recently, Minn, Wily, Illusionist. She's been picking up a lot of popularity recently, going so far as to be featured in a recent Price Spikes article. And I wanted to actually put together a deck tech for this card because this is a pet deck of mine, near and dear to my heart. So, let's go ahead and talk about Minn, and I've also done a little restructuring for these deck tech videos. I'm going to be going over some key cards in the deck before we go to the whole deck, and I've also got some budget replacements that I'm going to be talking about afterwards. Hopefully that'll help make you make more informed decisions while making a deck like this, and give you a little bit better idea of how it runs without me waffling around with opening hands and like 6 turns of play. We're just going to be looking at some mulligans at the end instead. Alright, so let's get right into it. Minn, Wily, Illusionist is a legendary creature, gnome wizard, for 1 blue and a blue. You get a 1/3. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, you make a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with this creature gets +1/+low for each other illusion you control. Whenever an illusion you control dies, you can put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. So at first glance, Minn, Wily, Illusionist feels like it should be an illusion tribal deck. However, I think that's about as far from the truth as I have personally felt. When I started building this deck, I felt the same way. I looked at this, I saw, ooh, illusions on this card a whole bunch of times. We should stick a bunch of illusions in this deck. What actually ended up happening is I'm playing about 4 illusions and then a bunch of other support cards for drawing cards, aiming to draw 2 cards every single turn in order to maximize the number of illusions Minn herself is generating. So let's go over the 5 key cards in this deck, in my opinion. The first one is Howling Mine and other effects like Howling Mine. For just 2 mana on Howling Mine itself, you get an artifact with, at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws a card. This card, while out, effectively guarantees that you are able to draw 2 cards on each of your turns and thus generate 1 illusion from Minn's ability. That's really important because we want to be making illusions with Minn's ability in order to try to win the game. Our deck is seeking to make those illusions, draw 2 cards each turn, and then have some really sick permanents to drop onto the board whenever one of those illusions were to die. So, speaking of illusions, the next card in our 5 key cards here is Maskwood Nexus. This is 4 mana for an artifact, and it says that creatures you control are every single creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Then for 3 mana, you can tap this and make a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling, which means it's every creature type. Effectively, this is our, illusion support within the deck. This is the card that suddenly makes Minn go absolutely insane when she's on the board, because now every single creature you control, when it dies, you're dropping something out of your hand onto the board, as long as you've got something that fits the criteria. Maskwood Nexus is a phenomenal card and generates us Changelings, aka more illusions, just to stack up the board and grow the illusions that Minn herself has generated. Next up is Perilous Research and other effects like this in the deck. Perilous Research is an instant for 1 and a blue that says, draw 2 cards, then sacrifice a permanent. You should not be casting Perilous Research while you have 0 illusions on board, but as long as you've got at least 1, you cast Perilous Research, you draw 2, triggering Minn's ability, but you have to sacrifice a permanent before her ability actually resolves, which means you can sacrifice one of your illusions and get to cheat something into play. Then your Minn trigger is going to resolve, and you get a new illusion right back. What's really important here is even if you just have 1 illusion on the board, Minn's ability says you can put a permanent into play. Not just a creature, not just artifacts and enchantments. You can put your lands into play with Minn's ability. And so Perilous Research is a really great way to grab 2 cards out of your right off the top of your deck and then ramp yourself a land. It's really nice. I like that effect a lot. Next we have Phantasmal Image. This is one of the few actual illusions that I am running in this deck, and I think this is one of the best ones. Not only can it copy whatever the best thing on the board is, but it has that illusion effect where if it becomes the target of a spell or ability, you sacrifice it. Normally that's a significant downside, but in a deck that's seeking to sacrifice its illusions in order to drop something huge onto the board, Phantasmal Image is a phenomenal way of making something big and having a sneaky way to kind of get it off your own board without a lot of hassle. And the last of the important 5 cards that we're looking at here is Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 legendary human rogue. It says creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. Now those illusions that Minn is making over here get +1/+0 for each other illusion you control, which means they will have 1 toughness, which means your Tetsuko Umezawa turns your army of illusions into unblockable monstrosities. Alright, so that's kind of a key look at what's really, really important in this deck. Let's go ahead and go over the deck itself. Now, I have a whole bunch of categories as usual here. We've got a small set of illusion support. We've got our ramp over here. We've got our interaction. We've got some sacrifice outlets so that we can very suddenly drop stuff onto the board. We have some drawing payoffs, and then we have 2 different types of draw categories. We have draw more than 2 for cards that have the ability to draw more than 2 cards at a time, or in Fabricate's case, tutor. And then we have draw 2, which are cards that more specifically help us successfully draw 2 cards within a turn. So we're going to go over all of these draw spells first, and then we'll talk about all the support pieces for them. But again, our goal with Minn is to draw 2 cards every turn, build up that army of illusions, and then sacrifice them at key times in order to drop big permanents onto the board, or ramp ourselves in the process. All right, so let's start with draw 2. Bident of Thassa says it is a legendary enchantment artifact for 2 blue. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. And then for 1 and a blue, you can, in tapping this, you can force your opponent's creatures, every creature your opponents control attack this turn if able. We're not going to be using that secondary effect very often unless we have lots of illusions ready to block, but it's certainly a good way to cause a little bit of chaos. What's important here is that if you can sneak just 1 illusion through every single turn, you're drawing that second card that you need. You can draw even more than that, so this also might fit into the burst draw, but I think it fit here because unless you have Tetsuko Umezawa out, you're probably not throwing a whole bunch of illusions around. Next we have Brainstorm. Yes, I know it says draw 3, not draw 2, but this is effectively a card where you jam it, you get your 2 card draws, and you make an illusion. And sure, you have to put 2 of them back on top of your library, but in this case, you've got your illusion, you've kind of done what you needed to do. We have Chemister's Insight, which is 3 and a blue for an instant that draws 2 cards, but it also has Jumpstart, which means you can cast this from your graveyard by pitching a card, in addition to paying its other costs, and then exile it. This is just basically a really simple way to have draw 2 cards on a stick 2 times for 1 card. Chemister's Insight's pretty cool. We have Consecrated Sphinx, 4 blue for a 4/6 flying Sphinx. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. This card is pretty pricey, both in mana cost and in actual money cost, but I think this card is well worth it for the deck. This card means you are guaranteed making your illusions every single turn as long as Minn is still out, and you're drawing so many cards that you're probably going to be able to protect her with absolutely no problems. We have Defiler of Dreams next, which is a Phyrexian Sphinx for 3 blue, 4/3 flyer. It lets you cast your blue permanent spells by paying 2 life instead of 1 of the actual blue mana in its mana value, and whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, you draw a card. Another easy way to trigger that second draw. We have Fairy Mastermind next for 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Fairy Rogue with Flash and Flying. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. And for 3 and a blue, each player draws a card. So effectively, on somebody else's turn, you can pay 4 mana, make everybody at the table draw a card, including yourself, and then because the turn player has already drawn a card for turn, they're going to draw their second card, and you're going to get a second card and an illusion. We have Ghostly Pilferer next, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Spirit Rogue. When it becomes untapped, you can pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. Discard a card, and it can't be blocked this turn, but majority of what you were trying to do with Ghostly Pilferer is ensure it ends up sideways, so discarding that card to make it unblockable if we need to. But more importantly, you know what is cast from anywhere other than the hand? Someone's commander. So Ghostly Pilferer on the board is ensuring that you are getting a card draw when somebody casts their commander. Maybe when they cast a spell out of exile if they're playing a deck like Prosper or Faldorn. We're getting a lot of those effects as of late. A lot of impulsive draw from red in general. Ghostly Pilfer is a steady source of card draw across your commander game. We have Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. This is the classic, I'm drawing way too many cards and I need a way to win the game. Jace is kind of a really good outlet for that. It is 1 blue for a legendary planeswalker, Jace. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. +1, target player mills 2, and you draw a card. -8, draw 7, and then if your library is empty, you win. Comes in with 4 loyalty. It's a way to consistently tick +1, draw an extra card every turn. Kami of the Crescent Moon is very similar to Howling Mine. It's a legendary spirit, 1/3 for 2 blue. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. We have Ledger Shredder here, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 bird advisor with flying. When a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. Conniving is draw a card, then discard a card, and if you pitched a non-land card, put a 1/1 counter on the creature that connived. Again, people are double spelling a lot in Commander, especially later in the game, and Ledger Shredder is a certain way to draw some extra cards on other people's turns, including you. If you cast 2 spells, Ledger Shredder connives. Loyal Drake is a 2 and a blue 2/2 flying Drake with Lieutenant, which means at the beginning of your combat on your turn, if you control your commander, draw a card. Like I said, this is draw 2. Meeting of Minds is a new card out of March of the Machine, 3 and a blue instant with Convoke, draw 2 cards. So you can just tap 4 of your illusions at the end of somebody's turn to draw 2 cards and make another illusion. We have Mind's Eye for 5 mana. It's an artifact. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you can pay 1, and if you do, draw a card. Sensei's Divining Top is a classic. 1 mana artifact. Pay 1 mana to look at the top 3 cards of your library and rearrange them in any order. Tap to draw a card, and then stick Divining Top on top of the deck. Another just really handy way to draw a card in a pinch. Sicarian Infiltrator, 2 and a blue for an artifact creature, Human Soldier. It's a 1/2 with Flash, and it has Squad 2, which means as an additional cost to cast this spell, you can essentially kick it by paying 2 any number of times. If you do, when this creature enters the battlefield, you make that many tokens that are direct copies of this card. And that just simply says when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So you can pay 3 mana to flash this in and draw 1 card. You can pay 5 to flash this in and draw 2 cards, and get 2 1/2 bodies. I don't know what's up with the little line across its power and toughness, though. Let's see if ticking it to the Surge Foil fixes that. It does. Very odd. Must be a bug on Architect. Or maybe Scryfall. I don't know what they pull from. But the more 2 mana you sink into this card, the more mana you have available, the more cards you're drawing, and the more copies of Sicarian Infiltrator you're getting. This card is really flexible and really helpful. I like this guy a lot. We have another Planeswalker, Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, 3 blue for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker Teferi. It says when you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi. 0, draw a card, which means you're still putting a loyalty counter on Teferi. That's drawing your second card in the turn. It's -2, makes a 2/2 blue spirit creature token, sadly not an illusion, with Vigilance, and when you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on that creature, and then it's -12, which is way more attainable than you might think it is. Target opponent chooses a permanent they control, bounce it to their hand, and then shuffle the rest of their non-lands into their library. That -12 is devastating, and it's shockingly easy to get off in a deck like this that's already trying to draw a lot of cards. Teferi can come out on 4, tick himself up by drawing a card to 5, and then with just maybe 1 or 2 additional spells over the next turn or 2, you can -12 so quickly, and you're making illusions with Minn in order to defend Teferi pretty nicely, because your opponent does not like attacking into things that die into you getting to play something for free, I've found. We have Thirst for Discovery next. This is kind of like Brainstorm in that it's draw 3 for real, but it's at instant speed, and it's 2 and a blue to draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land. So you're going card neutral on this, because you're using Thirst for Discovery, getting 2 more cards back, plus 1 additional to replace Thirst, and then you have to pitch 2. You've discarded basic, you've just gone up a card. Thirst for Discovery is really, really nice, and we run enough basics in this deck that this card is pretty live quite often. We have Triskaidekaphile next, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 human wizard. You have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. You pay 3 and a blue to draw a card. I have actually won the game with this card a couple of times. It's very threatening on the board, but in a deck like this, you're running so many threats, it's already pretty bad. And then when you can sneak this in on your last opponent's end step right before your untap, and you've managed to get enough cards in your hand to trigger this, it can be an absolutely out of nowhere win. It's incredibly powerful card. All right, now let's look at the drawing more than 2 effects. We have Alhammar's Archive, which is a 5-mana legendary artifact. If you gain life, gain twice that much life. If you draw a card, except the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 instead. This is a great way to ensure that smaller draw 1 triggers on opponent's turns, things like Ledger Shredder, for instance, turn into draw 2 and just guarantee you an illusion. Azami, Lady of Scrolls, 2 blue for a 0/2 human wizard. You tap an untapped wizard you control to draw a card. We run quite a few wizards in this deck, to be honest. Minn herself is a wizard, and so is Azami, which means that you're going to be able to tap those and pretty consistently draw 2 cards. We have Fabricate in here, which lets you search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. This is just a really convenient, easy way to grab some of those important artifacts out of your deck. We have Kindred Discovery for 3 blue. It's an enchantment with, when it enters, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. This is not going to be the thing that triggers to make your illusions a lot of the time, but it's just going to draw you extra cards off your illusions entering, or maybe make a new one when those creatures attack. We have Mystic Remora, which is just attacks, draw effect. Same with Rhystic Study here. We have Teferi's Puzzle Box. This is a 4-mana artifact. It says the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library in any order, and then draws that many cards. So you're guaranteeing yourself your draw 2 as long as you have 2 cards in your hand or more. And it's also just going to mess up all of your opponent's plans because they no longer get to keep their hand. They draw their card, and then boom, back to the bottom of the deck, and they just get a new hand. It's really annoying in a strong way, in a powerful way this deck is seeking to do. Then we have Transcendent Message. X, blue. So 4 blues, and then your X. It has Convoke, so you can tap your illusions to use this. You're going to draw X cards. This card has been a real highlight out of March of the Machine for me, I think. Between it and Meeting of Minds, these 2 Convoke effects to draw you cards seem incredibly powerful, and I've been really impressed with how they play. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our illusion package over here. We've only got a couple here, but we've got Lord of the Unreal, 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard. It says your illusion creatures get +1/+1 and have hexproof. So this is making them harder for your opponents to just straight up remove. Makes them just a little bit bigger as well. It's kind of a nice little extra piece in there. Moloku the Clouded Mirror is 4 and a blue. For a legendary Moonfolk wizard, it is a 2/4 with flying. For 1 mana, you can return a land you control to its owner's hand, and you make a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with flying. This card is an infinite combo of sorts with your, it's over here in the ramp category, with a card, oh no, it's in the sacrifice category, sorry, the card like Phyrexian Altar. You could also use Ashnod's Altar here if you wanted to generate infinite colorless mana instead, but essentially what you do here is you pay 1, you tap the land for mana, and you bounce it back to your hand. You make a blue illusion. You sacrifice that illusion to your altar, generating a land. Now, as long as Minn is out, you now get, not generating a land, sorry, generating mana. As long as Minn is out, you now get a trigger to put a permanent with with mana value 1 or less from your hand onto the board. You play that land you bounced. You tap that land for mana. You've already generated a mana with the altar, so now you can pay 1 to return a land you control to its owner's hand, make a new illusion creature with flying. And you just continue to do this over and over, generating any amount of mana that your heart could ever desire, playing that land infinitely and sacrificing that token infinitely. And you just finish the loop by generating the illusion or leaving your land alone. Now you have all the mana you could ever need. Draw your whole deck. Why not? You've got that power. We have Phantasmal Dragon next, 2 blue for a 5/5 flyer. Becomes the target of our spell or ability, sack it. It's just a big flying dragon. Blue doesn't get lots of big beaters like this, so I thought this card was just kind of a helpful include. Similar vibe for Phantasmal Dreadmaw. This one trades flying for trample, and gets +1/+1 instead because it is a meme. 2 blue as well, and I have the sketched foil version, so I just kind of had to put this in this deck. We also have Phantom Steed, 3 and a blue, for a 4/3 horse illusion with flash. When it enters, you exile another target creature you control until Phantom Steed leaves the battlefield. When Phantom Steed attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of the exiled creature, except it's an illusion in addition to its other types, and then sacrifice that token at the end of combat. So, as long as you've got something that you don't like super need to keep on the board, or has like a nice ETB like Mr. Urza over here, or maybe just an effect like Sakaran Infiltrator that enters and draws you a card, you are going to be able to make a token copy of that by just swinging with this solid body as a 4/3, and then you sacrifice the token copy that you made at the end of combat, triggering Minn's second ability because that thing enters as an illusion. All right, we're going to look at our interaction, then our sacrifice, then our payoffs. So in our interaction suite, I went ahead and put protection pieces, removal pieces, and counter pieces here. So Commander's Blade is the first one we have here. It's 1 mana for an equipment. The equipped creature gets +3/+3, and it has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity. You can equip your commander for just 3 mana, but anything else for 5. This is the perfect protection piece to put onto Minn. It gives her protection from everything except for blue, which I think is pretty significant. And it only costs you 3 mana to equip to her, 5 mana for anything else. This is just a really, really powerful protection piece for your commander. We have Counterspell next. We have Cyclonic Rift, Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation, Mana Drain. We have March of Swirling Mists here, which I think is just a really great game closer. For X and a blue, you can make up to X target creatures phase out. But as an additional cost to cast the spell, you can exile any number of blue cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. So if you've got a nice army of illusions on the board, but your opponents have blockers that you can't quite get by, if you've got a pretty decent grip, you can turn March of the Swirling Mists into temporary removal for a bunch of cards and swing in with your big illusions to finish off a game, pretty surprisingly out of nowhere. I've used this card to pretty great effect in Commander games before, and I hope you give this one a try. It's really great. We have Shadow Spear next. This card is really in here as a way to kind of give something trample and lifelink, but more importantly, turn off Hexproof and Indestructible to ensure that some removal can stick. Shadow Spear is just a really nice equipment to have sitting on the board, whether you actually are equipping it or not, and it can also be fetched with Urza Saga, which is in this deck. Next in our action suite, we have the Phasing of Zalfir. This is an enchantment saga for 2 blue. It has Read Ahead, which means you can pick which chapter you'd like this card to enter on. Chapters 1 and 2 let you phase another non-land permanent out, and it can't phase back in for as long as you control the Phasing of Zalfir. But its 3 is to destroy all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller makes a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. This is essentially Blue's Wrath of God. More importantly, this is Blue's Wrath of God that leaves you a new token behind for each creature that you wipe, and still lets you trigger Minn's ability. It's insane. You can even have this enter at 1 or 2 in order to protect like some really key creatures or pieces on your board. But this card is just going to come in, wipe your board, and then you're triggering Minn's ability for every single one of those illusions. You get to dump your hand onto the board. Also, similarly powerful, this itself is a permanent. This is not an instant. This is not a sorcery. This is an enchantment, which means that you can drop this in off one of your illusions dying as long as it had 4 or more power. We have Tidal Barracuda next. This is 3 and a blue for a 3/4 fish. Any player may cast spells as though they had flash, but your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. This is a really powerful way to not just turn on flash for not just yourself, but the whole board, but it really protects you during your turn. It makes you much harder to interact with. You can draw your cards in peace, make your stuff huge if you'd like. And then we have Wandering Archaic. 5 mana for a 4/4 avatar. When an opponent casts an instant or sorcery, they can pay 2. If they don't, you copy the spell and can choose new targets for it. This is just a really helpful card. It's going to let you copy their removal if they're trying to point it somewhere, copy draw spells maybe. Just overall, just a really valuable card. Really makes your opponent think about what they're doing with their instants and sorceries. There is a back to this card. I'm not going to read it because I don't think there's many situations where you're ever going to cast the back of this card. And then we have our Sacrifice suite here. We have Baron Master Wizard, 1 blue, a 1/1 legendary wizard. For 2 mana, you can sacrifice a permanent to bounce target creature to its owner's hand. We have Eldrazi Monument for 5 mana. It's an artifact. Your creatures get +1/+1, have flying, and are indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, you sack a creature, and if you can't, sack Eldrazi Monument. This, again, just a really powerful way to not just pump up your illusions and the other tokens that you're producing, but ensure that you have an easy way to just, boom, sack one of those creatures, put something else into play really quickly. And of course, what's really nice about this card too is as long as you have some sort of sacrifice outlet, you can instant speed sacrifice one of your illusions and bam, drop Eldrazi Monument in response to something like a board wipe. We have Phyrexian Altar next. You can replace this with Ashnod's Altar, which is a little cheaper at the moment as well. I just like this because it makes colored mana. We have Read the Runes, X and a blue for an instant. You can draw X cards. For each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. This is another way to not just draw a bunch of cards, but also sack your illusions as a way to drop things from your hand onto the board. You have Skull Clamp, single mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. The equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards, and equipped for only 1 mana. Hey, those illusions are X1s. Skull Clamp draws you 2 cards just by getting rid of one of those dudes, and even gives you +1 power just for your trouble. The last thing that we have here is our payoffs category. These are going to be the cards that are paying off us drawing cards and just kind of giving us benefits for doing so. The first one is Alondra Sky Dreamer. She is 2 blue for a legendary Merfolk Wizard. She's a 2/4. When you draw your second card each turn, make a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Whenever you draw your 5th card each turn, Alondra Sky Dreamer and all Drakes you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. With Maskwood Nexus out, this is just a finisher. But Alondra Sky Dreamer is also just a very powerful effect that's giving you additional tokens to give yourself some protection. And then maybe later in the game, if you want to draw a bunch of cards, pump your team up massively and kill someone. Ethereal Investigator is kind of a similar vibe. 3 and a blue for a 2/3 spirit with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate X times, where X is the number of opponents you have. So this is making you up to 3 clues usually, which can be sacked later to draw cards and thus trigger your Minn. But it also says when you draw your second card each turn, make a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. It's making you some blockers. This deck always needs some blockers, always needs some dudes laying around just to try and make yourself a little more safe as you set up all your draws. We have Murmuring Mystic next, 3 and a blue for a 1/5 human wizard. When you cast an instant or sorcery, make a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. This not only generates illusions, but whenever you cast those draw spells or your counter spells, you're just getting another body to help you out, and they can turn into land ramp later, or maybe something bigger when you have pump spells on the board. Winnierophage is 3 and a blue for a flying squid illusion. It's a 1/2. Whenever you draw a card, you put a 1/1 counter on Winnierophage. It's in here because 1, it's a flying threat that gets bigger every time you draw a card, and 2, it itself is an illusion. And then we have Toothy, Imaginary Friend. He's a legendary illusion. He's a 1/1 for 3 and a blue. He has partner with Pure Imaginative Rascal, but sadly Pure is green and cannot be in this deck. But the rest of the card is pretty relevant. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on Toothy, and when Toothy leaves, draw a card for each 1/1 counter on it. Alright, we're going to quickly run through our ramp, look at our land, and then we're going to talk about some budget options. Alright, we have Arcane Signet. We have High Tide because we're playing a lot of basics. We have Jeweled Lotus because our commander is a 3-drop. We have Mana Crypt because I own a Mana Crypt. We have Omniscience because this card, with enough illusions or enough pump, can be dropped into play for free. That's pretty cool. It's kind of magical Christmas landy, but I've actually done it before and won the game with it, so I mean, it happens. Sapphire Medallion is a nice cost reducer if you are able to afford it. Otherwise, play another piece of ramp. Sol Ring and Urza, Lord High Artificer. This is just a kind of nasty way to make use of lots of mana if you've got it. Turns your artifacts into mana rocks as well. I just play Urza in a lot of my blue decks, if I'm being honest. Alright, let's do a quick run through our lands. We are running a decent number of utility lands because this deck is not mega blue heavy, has a decent way to generate some other mana, and is a monocolored deck, so we should. Blast Zone here is just kind of a nice way to wipe some creatures on the board. You're not going to wipe your illusions with this either, but if there's a lot of lining up mana values, Blast Zone can be pretty darn valuable. We have Blighted Cataract because it is a colorless land that, for a decent chunk of mana, but later in the game can draw you 2 cards in one go. Buried Ruin lets you get an artifact out of your graveyard to your hand because we have some pretty valuable artifacts in this deck. Castle Vandress is a card that lets you generate blue mana, and it enters untapped if you control an island. You can pay some mana into it to scry 2. Cephalid Coliseum is an incredibly powerful blue generator. It is a little bit of pain, though, because when you tap it to add blue mana, it deals a damage to you and does not have a colorless option. But if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can pay a blue, tap, and sack this to draw 3 cards, then discard 3 cards. It doesn't even matter if you're effectively milling those 3 cards, that's making you an illusion. Command Beacon in case Minn gets removed enough and you need a way to cast her again. Demolition Field is a really solid way in Commander to deal with some non-basic land problems, but also make sure that you're not just, going down a mana. You and that opponent are each going to get a basic instead. Fabled Passage is a fetch land for basics. Hall of the Storm Giants is a potentially untapped blue source if you play it early. Late game it becomes a very large threat. Homeward Path makes sure your stuff can't get stolen. We're running 14 islands in this deck. A Lonely Sandbar because it can be cycled to draw you a card. Look at that. Hey, drawing a card. It's important. Same vibe with Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. 2 mana, each player draws a card. Also synergizes really nicely with Fairy Mastermind. Myriad Landscape is just some slow ramp for a monocolored deck like this. Mystic Sanctuary because 1, we're running a lot of islands, and 2, we're playing instants or sorceries, so we might as well have a small way to recur them. Otawara Soaring City is an incredibly powerful channel land that works as a bounce spell or as an untapped blue source. Riptide Laboratory is a small way to protect Minn because she herself is a wizard, so if she gets targeted and you don't want to pay that commander tax, you can just bounce her back to your hand and replay her next turn. Scavenger Grounds is some graveyard hate. Seagate Restoration is both a potentially untapped blue source and a massive draw spell. 2 for 1, great card. Urza's Saga is Urza's Saga. We're playing it because we can fetch some artifacts off of it, and it's just a good card. And then we have War Room, which 3 mana, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, which is 1, draw a card. Alright, that is a quick look at the deck. Now let's talk about some budget replacements, because as you may have noticed, there are some pricey cards in this deck. So I went ahead and looked at 10 cards that are pretty pricey or somewhat pricey normally, and a card that has a somewhat similar function to it. The first one we're going to look at here is Alondra Sky Dreamer. Amazing card, but she is $15 to $18 to pick up a copy of. So a card that I might replace Alondra Sky Dreamer with is Nadir Kraken. It is 1 blue for a 2/3 Kraken. Whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on Nadir Kraken and make yourself a 1/1 blue tentacle. This is not getting you a Drake, this isn't pumping your team, but you're making the Nadir Kraken bigger, and you're getting yourself a little blocker. And it's also 79 to 19 cents, depending on what source you're picking it up from. We have Baron Master Wizard next. This is that bounce spell from sacrificing a permanent, but he's $13, $14, $15. There is a card, very similar effect, just higher mana value on an enchantment called Dispersing Orb that is 24 to 35 cents, 3 blue for an enchantment, 3 and a blue to sack a permanent, return target permanent to its owner's hand. Same vibe, but what's really nice about Dispersing Orb is it can even hit your opponent's lands. It's really mean if you have lots of mana, so it's a really nice card. Eldrazi Monument is pretty pricey, $12 to $14. I went ahead and said you should try out Unctus Grand Meditact. 1 blue for a 2/4 legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Vidalcan. Other blue creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. And for a Phyrexian blue, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a blue artifact. In addition to its other colors and types, activate only at sorcery speed. What I like about Unctus is this is kind of a card draw option rather than specifically a sacrifice option, but it's still going to pump your team as long as you can get your things to be artifacts, and his activated ability can certainly make that happen. Eldrazi Monument isn't really a card that has a direct, 1-for-1, more expensive mana value or weirder replacement, but I found Unctus was a good enough card to include in this deck that normally would not make the cut for me. Fairy Mastermind, not only a new card, but also a pretty pricey card. I would suggest replacing this with Wiretapping out of Streets of New Capenna. This is 4 and a blue for an enchantment with Hideaway 5, letting you look at the top 5 cards of your library when this enters, exiling 1 face down and the rest onto the bottom. It says whenever you draw your first card during each of your draw steps, draw a card. Then if you have 9 or more cards in hand, you can play the exiled card for free. This is a valuable little piece that lets you play something for free and is guaranteeing you're getting your draw 2 on each of your turns. Next, let's see, where did we go? There we are. We are at Jeweled Lotus next. Jeweled Lotus is incredibly expensive. This card is about $100. Crazy good. Replace it with an island. Just replace it with an island. Let me show you. I'm running 34 lands. You could have 35 lands. And islands are way cheaper than a Jeweled Lotus. This card's just a very powerful ramp option, but it doesn't really have a comparison, so just replace it with an island. Alright, next we're going to look at Mana Drain over here. Incredible counterspell, probably one of the best 2-mana counterspells in the entire game because you're getting mana off of whatever you counter. However, it's $45. Replace it with Abjure. It's a single blue mana to counter target spell. You just have to sacrifice a blue permanent when you do so, and it's almost like that deck likes to do that. This card's about 50 cents. It's absolutely fantastic to include. We have Teferi's Puzzle Box next. This is definitely the cheapest card that I'm suggesting a replacement for, but I would replace the Puzzle Box with Chasm Skulker. 2 and a blue for a 1/1 Squid Horror. When you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on your Chasm Skulker. When it dies, make X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk, where X is the number of 1/1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So while this is not shuffling away your opponent's game plans, this is just another way to get a big creature whenever you draw cards, and then disperse it into a bunch of little blockers. Alright, next up, we are going to look at Phyrexian Altar over here. This is $24, $25. Even a decent replacement is $7 or $8 normally, but I'm going to suggest Drowned Rusalka instead. A single blue for a 1/1 spirit, sacrifice a creature and discard a card, then draw a card. This is just a really good way to get some extra draw triggers. It's still doing the same kind of sacrifice, but instead of making mana, you're getting cards. We are going to look at Ledger Shredder next. This is a $15 to $24 card. 1 in a blue, 1/3, the whole connive nonsense. We need something comparable. Let's try Psychosis Crawler instead. It's a 25, 50-cent card for an artifact creature for Phyrexian Horror. It's 5 mana, but its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your hand, which should be a lot. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. So you're getting a pinger instead of a flyer. Alright. And then Teferi's Puzzle Box. Let's see. Did I talk about this one? Yes, because I got things out of order. There we go. The Puzzle Box replaces not into Chasm Skulker. I apologize. It's into Dictate of Krufix. 1 blue for an enchantment with Flash. Beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. So we are replacing this shuffle, or not even shuffle, but replacement of your cards in your hand and drawing cards with just another Howling Mine effect. And then that Chasm Skulker that I was talking about is a replacement for Toothy. I apologize, not for the Puzzle Box. Alright, so there is a look at some budget replacements that I would make. This should hopefully bring the price of the deck down a little bit. Some other cards that I'm just going to quickly flick through. There's a lot of kind of expensive counterspells in here. Mana Drain, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship. We even have a Cyclonic Rift in here. You can replace these with significantly cheaper counterspells. You can play your negates. You can play your 3 manas. An offer you can't refuse. Just look for those budget options that are costing you a significant amount less while still making sure that you're getting the power that you need in your deck. Alright, last thing we're going to do here is talk about some mulligans. To open up that playtester, take a look at one of these opening hands. This, for instance, is a hand that is just so obviously not keepable that we're not even going to talk about it. It's a 1-lander that's a colorless lander. Here we go. This is a card that is 2-lander. One of your colors enters untapped, and everything in your hand is a little bit pricier than I think you would like. I don't think that this is a keepable hand. You may disagree, and we're going to hit keep this just to see what the top card is. Look at that. We did not get another land. Not a keepable hand. This here, wow. I don't know why, but whenever I do this series, I don't get keepable hands for so often. Let's mulligan. Because we have free mulligans in Commander. Alright, so this is a hand that also doesn't look particularly keepable. We don't have a blue source. But we do have a Myriad Landscape. We just drew a Mystic Remora. That feels even worse. Don't keep hands like this. How about this one? Oh, there we go. We have 2 pieces of lands in our hand. We have a card that's going to draw us into more cards. Let's keep this and see what happens. We're going to turn 1 the island after drawing a Mikakoro Center of the Sea. We're going to draw for turn. Look at that. We're going to play that Urza Saga because that's just the way to do it. We are not going to cast the Perilous Research yet, but that is a way to draw cards if we were willing to sacrifice one of these for some strange reason. Draw into an additional land as well. Sadly, we can't cast Minn off of this hand, so that's something we do have to keep in consideration. But because we've drawn our Fairy Mastermind, we actually do have a way to start getting some cards going. And then look at that, there's a Read the Runes as well. Not quite what we're looking for here, but we're certainly making some progress on doing something good. That's a considerably more keepable hand, even if we don't quite have the colored mana sources yet. We're going to get there eventually. We can even use our Urza Saga to go get that Jeweled Lotus in order to get Minn out. Let's look at one more hand real quick. Maybe we can get a keepable on the first time, and I would say we did. We have 2 turn 1 plays here. We have 2 sources of blue mana and a Homeward Path in our hand, plus a High Tide. I say we start with an island into a Sensei's Divining Top. We pass. We draw. We play that Hall of Storm Giants because it enters untapped right here, right now. Why don't we go ahead and drop that Shadow Spear? And then even if we pass the turn, we have the ability to use the Sensei's Top to rearrange our top 3 to guarantee we get the best thing. I think we want to rearrange in this order to put the Fairy Mastermind on top. And we can move to our turn, draw, play our untapped Castle Vantress, and boom. Drop Miss Minn right onto the board, and then we tap our top to draw a card, put this on top, and now we are generating an illusion. That's not the right illusion. We are generating an illusion. It's not tricks, Michael. It's illusions. I'm whiffing that quote horribly, but it's the name of the deck, kind of. So that looks like a considerably more powerful opening hand here, where we know what we're drawing into. We've got a whole bunch of powerful colored mana here. We're able to drop things like our top every single turn if we need to. Look, we'll pop it right back out. We also can hold the Fairy Mastermind around, but we can just, draw our card and make another illusion. I think these are pretty powerful turns where we're just generating that illusion every turn. And then we can hold this Fairy Mastermind for if an opponent tries to draw a second card, just to get ourselves a free card in the process. So, yeah, that's a quick look at what kind of hands you're looking for. You're looking for hands especially that have 2 sources of blue mana, because Minn herself is 1 blue and a blue. And you're looking for some playable cards pretty early on that are going to draw you some cards. All right, thank you very much for watching this deck tech for Minn, Wily, Illusionist. I really hope you enjoyed. If you liked this video, please give it a like. If you'd like to see more like this, please subscribe. If you have a deck that you'd like to see, either one that I've already built and maybe have mentioned before on the channel, or a commander that you would like to see built that you think I might do a good job with, please comment that down below and ring the bell if you'd like notifications whenever I upload videos. I've been trying to really uptick the amount of decks that are on, not even just decks, but videos that are going up on the channel as of late. I'm trying to get some interest going again. So please, if you have somebody that you would like to watch this video, give it a share. Help me out. I'm trying to get there. Thank you all again so much for watching. I've been Zach. Take it easy.